So I want you to imagine kicking down the door of a warehouse in like the sweltering heat of Brazil.
Oh, man.
And the first thing that hits you isn't, the smell of contraband or typical cartel activity. It's a hum.
Right, just this low, persistent electric buzzing.
Exactly. And the suffocating heat generated by just thousands of lithium-ion batteries. Because you walk into the main room and the walls are literally paved with smartphones.
The massive grids and
Bricks upon grids, yeah. Glowing in the dim light, all wired into these huge server racks. And there's no one in the room actually looking at the screens. But on those screens, videos are playing, streams are being liked, comments are being typed out, and pages are endlessly scrolling.
it's basically the physical manifestation of a digital ghost town.
Totally.
What those Brazilian authorities raided wasn't a drug den, right? It was
Yeah.
a U farm.
Hmm.
I mean, it's a massive, highly orchestrated engine designed to manufacture human attention out of thin air.
Which is wild. And welcome to the Morning Roundup, by the way. Every day, we take the wildest, most disparate stack of source material from the cultural zeitgeist, and we hunt for the invisible thread connecting it all.
And today's thread is a big one.
It is. We're calling it the architecture of illusion versus the craving for reality. We are going to look at how that Brazilian warehouse of wired-up phones connects to, well, the advertising industry, completely ignoring the wealthiest generation on Earth.
Right, Gen X.
Yep. And we're going to map how historical espionage and honey traps kind of explain the financial operations of Jeffrey Epstein, plus how the philosophical fallout of the Enlightenment is, actively destroying modern dating.
And, most importantly, what you can actually do to protect yourself from a public square that is increasingly synthetic.
Oh, exactly. So just a heads up for this deep dive, there are no caveats today, no watering it down. We're just mapping the territory of these sources. We aren't taking sides on the political stuff. We're just laying out what the material says.
Yeah, we're just impartial guides here.
Right. So let's get into the internet. Because the data we are looking at regarding the dead internet theory is just staggering.
Oh, it really is.
We're talking about a reality where the majority of internet traffic, like 51 to 53%, is no longer generated by human beings.
Yeah, and we really have to be incredibly precise about what we mean by bots here,
Yeah, clarify that.
Because a decade ago, if you said bot traffic, you were mostly talking about benign infrastructure, like Google crawlers, indexing websites for search results, or automated ping services just making sure a server is still online.
Right, the plumbing of the internet.
Exactly, the plumbing.
Hmm.
But the data analyzed by the Basecamp researchers indicates this massive paradigm shift. They point out that roughly 40% of overall internet traffic is now comprised of bad bots.
Wow, 40%.
Yeah, and these are not passive indexers. These are active impersonators.
Impersonators. I mean, that's the key word right there. They aren't just hitting refresh on a web page to artificially inflate a counter.
Oh, exactly the opposite. The technology running those phones in that Brazilian warehouse is terrifyingly sophisticated.
How so?
Well, the software spoofing these views utilizes rotating residential IP addresses. So to the platform security systems, it doesn't look like 10,000 requests coming from one server in a warehouse in Brazil.
It looks like normal people.
Right, it looks like 10,000 individual households in Ohio, Texas, and Florida.
That is insane.
And they program these bots to have robust user histories too. Like the bot will watch a cooking video for 3 minutes, pause, scroll down to read a comment.
Like a real person getting distracted.
Exactly. Then it'll switch to a gaming stream, mute the audio, let it play in the background for an hour, and then drop a generic but contextually appropriate comment.
Like, wow, didn't expect that.
Exactly. They simulate the chaotic, distracted nature of a real human being perfectly.
Which completely breaks the trust mechanism of the internet, if you think about it. I mean, when you log onto a platform like Twitch, you look at the viewer count to gauge what's culturally relevant.
Of course. It's social proof.
Right. If a streamer has 40,000 viewers, your brain naturally assumes, well, this is the place to be. This is the stadium everyone is sitting in.
Yeah, but the commentary from Asmgold on this issue lays out a much darker reality about the incentives at play here.
Yeah, gets real honest about it.
He does. He points out that viewbotting is basically an open secret. Almost every major player is likely benefiting from it in some way. But the real mechanism keeping it alive isn't just the streamer's ego.
No, it's the platform's bottom line.
Exactly. You have to follow the money up the corporate ladder. Platforms like Twitch, Kick, or even YouTube, They operate on a metric-driven valuation model.
Right, it's all about the data they can sell.
Yeah. When executives from these companies sit down in boardrooms with venture capitalists or major advertisers, the currency they're trading on is MAUs.
Monthly active users.
Right, monthly active users and total minutes watched. So if you are an executive and you know deep down that 30% of your top streamers' audience is actually a wall of glowing phones in South America,
What is your incentive to nuke those bots?
zero. Zero incentive.
Because if you delete the bots, your overall platform metrics drop by 30%. Your valuation takes a massive hit.
The stock price wobbles.
Yeah, the advertisers demand a discount. You are literally financially disincentivized from enforcing reality.
And it gets even more insidious when we look at how this manipulation is forced upon creators who don't even want it.
Oh, the clip spamming stuff.
Yes. The sources detail this phenomenon of clip spamming. Let's take Caleb Hammer, for example. He's a highly successful financial YouTuber.
Right, he does those intense financial audits.
Exactly. His organic content is long-form, sit-down stuff. But secondary platforms, like Kick, they want to artificially manufacture their own virality.
So they piggyback on his face.
Right. Highly organized networks take 10-second high-drama clips of Caleb Hammer yelling about credit card debt, and they deploy bot networks to spam these clips across TikTok, YouTube Shorts, and X.
But they aren't doing this to help Caleb build his audience.
Not at all. They are doing it to hijack the short-form algorithms. They use his recognizable face as a non-consensual endorser, basically slapping a link to a completely different stream or platform in the bio.
It's essentially digital human trafficking. I mean, they are kidnapping a creator's likeness, pumping it full of synthetic engagement, and harvesting the algorithmic momentum.
It is.
But surely, I mean, a company as massive as Google, which owns YouTube, they have the engineering power to detect and destroy this, right?
They do. And the sources highlight a French study from 2024 that analyzed 100,000 YouTube videos over 18 months. And they found that YouTube actively deletes fake views.
Okay, so they do fight it.
They do. But the timing of the deletion is the smoking gun here.
Right, walk me through the timing.
This is where we get into the actual mechanics of algorithmic illusion.
Yeah.
The study revealed that YouTube typically purges these synthetic views in daily batches, frequently around 5 p.m.
Okay, 5 p.m. Why does that matter?
Because the damage, or rather the profit, has already been realized by then. Let's break down the timeline of a manipulated video. Say a creator uploads a video at 9 a.m.
Okay.
Between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m., a bot network injects 50,000 highly sophisticated fake views. Now, the YouTube recommendation algorithm, which is entirely separate from the fraud detection algorithm, looks at that velocity and says, wow, this video is incredibly hot. People are loving this.
So the algorithm throws that video onto the homepage of a million real users.
Precisely. That early synthetic engagement provides what marketers call social proof. Real humans see a thumbnail with 50,000 views in 2 hours, and their psychological bias kicks
Well,
in.
everyone else is watching this. I should too.
Exactly. So by 4 p.m., the video has accumulated 200,000 genuine human views, driven entirely by the algorithmic boost of the initial fake views.
Wow.
Then, at 5 p.m., the fraud detection algorithm finally kicks in and deletes the original 50,000 bot views.
But wait, the creator still walks away with 200,000 real views? They keep the ad revenue from those real views. They kept the real subscribers. The platform keeps the real engagement.
Yep, it's brilliant and terrifying.
The creator essentially used fake water to prime a very real pump. And once the water is flowing, the platform quietly removes the fake water so nobody asks questions. The illusion successfully manifested an actual profitable reality.
And, the sources point out that this isn't isolated to just the digital realm. It's a long-standing tactic in legacy media, too. They compare it to book laundering.
Oh, like the bestseller lists.
Exactly. For decades, authors or publishers would buy their way onto the Wall Street Journal or New York Times bestseller lists.
But they wouldn't just buy 10,000 copies from one store, right? Because that would look obvious.
Right. They would hire specialized firms to execute micro-purchases across hundreds of specific Barnes & Noble locations that they knew reported directly to the bestseller data systems.
Which is crazy. They spoofed the physical point-of-sale system the exact same way the Brazilian View Farm spoofs residential IP addresses.
It is the exact same mechanism. You manufacture the illusion of popularity to trigger the algorithm, whether that algorithm is YouTube's homepage or a bookstore patron browsing the bestsellers table.
Okay, so We've established that the metrics of popularity in our public square are deeply structurally manipulated.
Oh, completely.
But let's take this a step further and look at the commercial side. Because if the digital economy is faking its numbers, who actually holds the real economic power in the tangible world? And why are they completely invisible?
This is fascinating.
We have incredible data here regarding Generation X. So that's the demographic currently aged 45 to 60.
Yeah, and the financial footprint of Generation X is just staggering. According to the consumer data we reviewed, Gen X currently accounts for 27% of all global consumer spending.
27%. That's massive.
Huge. They're in their absolute peak earning years, their mortgages are largely stabilized, their kids are getting older, and they possess significant disposable income.
Plus the inheritance factor.
Right. Beyond their own earnings, they are standing on the precipice of the largest intergenerational wealth transfer in human history. As the baby boomers pass on, Gen X is next in line to inherit an estimated $70 trillion.
$70 trillion. I mean, if you are an advertising executive or a media planner or a brand strategist, you should be hyperventilating trying to figure out how to talk to Gen X.
You'd think so.
You should be studying their habits, catering to their nostalgia, and fighting tooth and nail for their loyalty. But the reality is the exact opposite.
It really is a massive blind spot. The statistics show that Gen X appears in only 4% of television advertisements.
That disparity braced my brain. 27% of global spending power, but only 4% representation.
And it gets worse. When the advertising industry conducts generation-specific market research, only 4% of their budget is allocated to understanding Gen X.
So what are they spending the rest of the money on?
They are spending 96% of their billions trying to decode the anxieties of Gen Z and millennials, demographics with significantly less liquid capital and far higher debt burdens. Or, they're still catering to boomers who are aging out of peak consumption.
Let me put it this way, just to paint a picture for you listening. Imagine you run a high-end restaurant. It's Friday night, the music is pumping, the lighting is perfect. You look around, and every table is full.
You think you have the hottest spot in town.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you walk up and tap the diners on the shoulder, 50% of them are animatronics. They're mannequins with speakers in their chests playing recorded chatter.
Like a view farm.
Right. They aren't eating, and they certainly aren't paying. Meanwhile, standing outside in the freezing rain is a crowd of 50-year-olds holding briefcases full of cash, begging for a table.
And your waitstaff is actively ignoring them to go polish the mannequins.
Yes. How does a multi-billion-dollar industry become this economically irrational?
Well, the sources say it comes down to two factors, calcified logic and algorithmic bias.
Walk me through the calcified logic first.
So that dates back to the 1960s broadcast television era. The advertising industry became obsessed with the 18 to 49 demographic.
The golden demo.
Right. The prevailing theory was that if you could capture a consumer in their 20s, you could secure decades of brand loyalty. Once a consumer hit 50, their brand preferences were supposedly locked in, making them useless for advertised to.
Which made sense when there were only 3 TV channels.
Exactly. That logic worked in a monolithic media environment. But today, the 25-year-old millennial or Gen Z media planner sitting at an agency in New York isn't questioning that inherited dogma.
They're just following the spreadsheet.
Right. They're just repeating the 18 to 49 mantra because that's what the data model tells them to do.
And what about the algorithmic side? Like, why don't the social media platforms autocorrect for this since they have all the data?
Because the algorithm only measures what is loud.
Ah, right.
Gen X is historically known as the latchkey generation. They are cynical, they're self-reliant, and most importantly, they do not loudly perform their generational identity online.
Yeah, you don't see Gen X making tearful TikToks about how brands are ignoring them.
Exactly. They just quietly spend their money where they find value. But the modern digital machine runs entirely on the fuel of visible distress, performative identity, and constant content generation.
So because Gen X refuses to participate in the performance?
The algorithms simply edit them out of the visible reality. The system doesn't measure economic reality. It measures the performance of reality.
Wow. So we have a public square where half the cheering crowd is robots and the people holding all the money are invisible.
That's the architecture of illusion.
Which begs the ultimate question. If the things we can see, like the internet feeds and the advertising markets, are just a facade, who is operating the levers in the dark?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. While we are all distracted arguing with bots on X, who is managing the actual flows of geopolitical power and capital,
And that leads us directly into the deep waters of structural power and intelligence operations, utilizing the analysis provided by Jay Dyer and Zuby. And we really need to approach this methodically.
Definitely. It's dense material.
It is. The core argument being presented here is that the mainstream narrative surrounding Jeffrey Epstein is not just incomplete, it is fundamentally a misdirection.
Because the public has been fed a story of a lone, predatory billionaire running this isolated blackmail ring for personal gratification.
Right. But the sources reframe Epstein entirely. They argue we need to look at him as a highly embedded intelligence operative, an elite financial fixer, and a consultant operating at the very pinnacle of global power structures.
The connections they pull are crazy. The documents and connections presented tie him directly to super-governmental policy groups like the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations.
Yeah, Epstein himself reportedly boasted, in emails and on the record, about acting as an attaché to David Rockefeller and representing the financial interests of the Rothschild family.
Okay, so to understand the mechanics of this, we have to explore what the sources call the economics of chaos.
Right.
Why would these incredibly powerful families or banking institutions need someone like Epstein? What is the actual currency he was providing? Because it wasn't just compromising photographs.
No, the blackmail was merely the key to unlock the vault. The actual treasure was advanced intel.
Walk me through that. How does a honey trap translate into a massive financial portfolio?
Okay, let's say you successfully compromise a high-ranking finance minister of a European nation. You have him on tape.
Got it.
You don't ask him for $1 million in hush money. That's petty theft. Instead, you ask him for the exact date and hour his government plans to default on their sovereign debt.
Oh, wow.
Or the exact phrasing of an upcoming regulatory shift. The sources cite communications where Epstein is discussing incredibly granular pre-market intelligence regarding the Greek IMF debt crisis or the impending geopolitical destabilization of Somalia.
So Epstein takes that pre-market intelligence and he goes to his billionaire clients, or the heads of JP Morgan, and he says, hey, move your assets out of the euro on Tuesday at 4 p.m. and short these specific bonds.
Exactly. When the chaos hits the public markets on Wednesday morning, the billionaires have already positioned their capital. They absorb the shock and profit from the collapse. It is insider trading on a geopolitical scale.
And the sources draw a direct line back to the historical template for this, right? Set by the Rothschild family during the Napoleonic Wars.
They do. The legend, whether perfectly accurate or slightly mythologized, is that the Rothschilds used a network of carrier pigeons and fast boats to receive the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo a full day before the British government knew.
Which is a massive advantage.
Huge. They then went to the London Stock Exchange, feigned panic, sold their bonds to trigger a market crash, and then secretly bought up the entire market for pennies on the dollar before the official news of the victory arrived.
Advanced knowledge is the ultimate financial leverage.
Precisely. And Epstein was just the modern-day carrier pigeon using human compromise instead of boats.
But the sources point out this isn't a new invention at all. It's a deeply established historical tactic. They talk about Kenji Doihara in the early 20th century. What was his play?
So Doihara was a master of structural crime, acting on behalf of the Japanese Empire. Before the Japanese military ever set foot in certain regions of China, Doihara would move in and establish a massive covert infrastructure of opium dens, gambling syndicates, and prostitution rings.
It was a macro-level honey trap.
Exactly. By the time the actual invasion occurred, the local Chinese leadership, the police forces, and the bureaucratic officials were so deeply compromised, addicted, or blackmailed that the societal structure simply capitulated.
There was no resistance because the leaders were already owned.
Yep. It's the Samson and Delilah template scaled up to the nation-state level. You find the weakness, you exploit it, and you shear the hair.
And we see this template repeated over and over. I mean, the sources bring up Operation Gladio in post-World War II Italy.
Right, that's a classic example.
They detail how intelligence apparatuses, allegedly under the guidance of figures like Henry Kissinger, utilized a bizarre alliance of secret Masonic lodges, the Sicilian Mafia, and the Vatican Bank to completely co-opt the Italian parliament.
To ensure the communists never took power.
Exactly. Or the car wash scandal in Brazil, which was an impossibly complex labyrinth of shell companies, state-run oil contracts, and bribery that resulted in the capture of almost the entire political class.
Which brings us to the sociological theory the sources use to explain how this architecture is maintained. They call it the dynamic of the bloods and the brains.
The bloods and the brains. I find this concept so interesting.
It really is. If you look at the structure of global power, it sits far above the petty partisan squabbles of elected politicians.
Because politicians have, what, 2 to 4 year attention spans? They are middle management.
Exactly. Above them, you have the Bloods, the blue blood dynastic families who are born into immense multi-generational wealth, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the Rothschilds.
But simply being born rich doesn't mean you possess the strategic genius to run a global empire.
Right, you need a COO.
You need the brains.
Yes. The dynastic families actively recruit highly intelligent, ruthless, and capable individuals from academia or the lower classes to architect the systems.
People like Zbigniew Brzezinski or Henry Kissinger.
Exactly. They weren't born into dynastic wealth. They were recruited for their intellect and elevated to run the steering committees, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission.
And Epstein in this framework was a high-level brain, right?
Yeah, a sociopathic savant recruited to manage the dirty mechanics of the system on behalf of the Bloods.
And the sources heavily emphasize that this control mechanism isn't just financial, it's cultural. They spend a lot of time on Hollywood.
Oh, massive amount of time on Hollywood.
They cite Edward Bernays, who is the literal founding father of public relations. He recognized early on that Hollywood was the most potent engine of mass propaganda ever conceived.
And they detail the incestuous origins of the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA and the studio system.
Yeah, you had massive A-list celebrities like Jimmy Stewart operating as actor intelligence assets. You had Ian Fleming, an actual naval intelligence officer, creating the James Bond franchise, not just as entertainment, but as an explicit psychological warfare tool to shape the Western mind during the Cold War.
It's all connected.
Okay, let me pause and challenge this framework, because I can hear you listening, thinking it. This sounds incredible.
Sounds like a movie.
It sounds exactly like sitting in the villain's boardroom in a James Bond movie.
Welcome to Spectre, gentlemen. Our global extortion revenue is up 12%.
Right.
But logically, how do you keep a conspiracy of this magnitude from collapsing? You're talking about coordinating central banks, intelligence agencies, Hollywood studios, and geopolitical policy.
There are a lot of moving parts.
The sheer complexity makes it fragile. Human beings are messy, they get drunk, they leave laptops in cabs, they grow a conscience. Someone always talks. How does this not implode? That is the most common and rational pushback against theories of structural power. But the counterargument presented by the sources is that you don't need a perfectly airtight, omnipotent conspiracy.
You don't.
No. You don't need to control all 8 billion people, and you don't need every low-level banker to be in on the plot. You only need to control the critical nodes.
The choke points.
Exactly. You control the central bank policy, you control the boards of the top 3 media conglomerates, and you control the intelligence choke points. If you control the flow of capital and the flow of the overarching narrative, the rest of the system naturally aligns itself to those incentives.
And as for the people who do talk, they whistleblowers.
You don't even need to assassinate them anymore.
Wow, really?
Exactly. You just bury them under the synthetic noise we discussed in the first segment.
The view farms.
Yes. If a whistleblower releases a 500-page document proving structural corruption, you don't need to silence him. You just use your bot networks to flood the zone with 50,000 conflicting narratives, generated outrage, and memified distractions.
You degrade the public's ability to discern truth to such a degree that the whistleblower sounds like just another crazy person shouting on the internet.
You drown the truth in a sea of synthetic irrelevance.
Wow. Okay, so if the oligarchs control the capital and the algorithms control the digital square, what happens to our actual minds?
That's the next layer.
Because controlling money isn't enough to sustain an empire long term. You have to legitimize the power. You have to engineer belief. And that brings us to the restructuring of religion, reason, and objective morality.
Drawing again from the deep dive by Jay Dyer, we see a historical focus on how NGOs, massive tax-exempt foundations, and think tanks like the Rand Corporation have actively worked to steer religious institutions.
It's social engineering.
Completely. The source points to the Rockefeller family's extensive funding and cultivation of the World Council of Churches. This wasn't charity, it was an explicit tool.
Right. The goal was to take the immense cultural power of traditional Christianity and hollow it out, replacing the theology with a manageable, secularized social gospel that aligned with globalist policies.
And they cite texts that are basically the blueprints for this. Jonas Salk's Survival of the Wisest and Zbigniew Brzezinski's Between Two Ages.
And these aren't fringe pamphlets. These are foundational texts of the modern technocratic elite.
And they explicitly detail the goal of utilizing scientific advancement and mass media to merge global belief systems into a new, unified, and highly manageable world religion.
They want to replace organic, transcendent faith with a manufactured earthly consensus.
But to understand why modern society was so vulnerable to this theological hijacking, we have to look back at the philosophical earthquake that made it possible.
The Enlightenment.
Right. Our source from Paul Vanderklay, summarizing the brilliant theologian Leslie Newbigin, breaks down this monumental shift. If you go back to the medieval mind, before figures like Francis Bacon, Galileo, and Isaac Newton, the entire universe was viewed through the Aristotelian lens of purpose.
Or telos.
Telos, exactly.
So everything had a designated end goal. The rain fell because it was meant to water the crops. Humans existed because they were meant to commune with God. The universe was a grand, intentional design.
But the Enlightenment shattered that framework. It replaced the concept of purpose with a strictly mechanistic view of cause and effect.
Right.
The universe was no longer a grand design. It was a giant, unfeeling clockwork machine governed by mathematical laws. The rain doesn't fall to water crops. It falls because of atmospheric pressure and gravity. End of story.
And the sociological impact of this shift was devastating to religion. Because science could prove cause and effect through mathematics, science laid claim to the realm of public, objective facts.
Leaving religion out in the cold.
Exactly. Religion, because it deals with purpose and the transcendent, was violently evicted from the public square. It was shoved into the realm of the private and subjective.
Faith was no longer considered a fundamental truth about reality. It was reduced to a personal lifestyle choice, like knitting or enjoying jazz music.
Which brings us directly to the intense political theology of Stephen Wolfe. And again, as the morning roundup, we are just mapping the arguments here.
Right, just presenting the sources.
Wolfe is utilizing classical Protestant frameworks to aggressively push back against this exact Enlightenment division. He argues that we have conceded far too much ground, and he starts by drawing a hard classical distinction between reason and faith.
How does he define them? Because usually we use those words interchangeably with logic and belief.
Well, for Wolfe, reason gives humanity access to natural truths. These are objective, universal realities encoded into the fabric of human existence, available to everyone regardless of whether they have ever read a Bible.
Can you give an example?
Yeah. For example, the understanding that murder is destructive to human flourishing, which is codified in the Sixth Commandment. You don't need a divine revelation to know that a society that legalizes murder will collapse. That is reason.
Okay, and faith.
Faith, however, deals with the mysteries that elevate above human logic. The nature of the Trinity, or the mechanics of salvation by grace. You cannot deduce the Trinity by looking at a tree.
Okay, so reason handles the mechanics of human flourishing, and faith handles the divine mysteries. How does he apply this politically?
He uses it to ruthlessly critique a massive faction within modern Christianity, specifically what he calls the Kellerites, followers of the late Tim Keller.
The beautiful witness idea.
Right. The Kellerite model argues that Christians should engage in politics primarily to present a beautiful, winsome witness to secular society.
The goal is to be so nice, so accommodating, and so culturally engaged that the secular elites will look at Christians and say, wow, what a beautiful way to live.
And Wolfe hates this. He says reducing politics to a PR campaign for Jesus is a catastrophic conceptual failure.
He does. He argues that the historical and logical end goal of politics is not a beautiful witness. It is the establishment of the common good. And historically, across classical philosophy and theology, promoting the common good inherently included promoting true religion and objective morality.
This is where Wolfe introduces a concept that requires us to do a little logic puzzle.
The mixed syllogism.
Yes. Walk me through the mechanics of this, because this is how he justifies Christians wielding actual political power.
Okay, so a mixed syllogism takes a universal principle of natural law, combines it with a specific proposition of faith, and arrives at a political conclusion. Let's break it down.
Okay, go for it.
Premise A is the natural principle of government, derived purely from reason. A government has a duty to promote public virtue and suppress absolute moral decay for the survival of the nation. Any rational person, religious or not, can agree with premise A.
Right. If you don't suppress decay, you get anarchy.
Then you add premise B, which is the proposition of grace. Christianity provides the ultimate and true framework for public virtue.
And therefore, the conclusion. The government has a duty to promote the Christian framework.
Exactly. Wolf argues that when a Christian pushes for laws against abortion or fights against the hypersexualization of children in public schools, they are not imposing a subjective private hobby onto the public.
They are imposing an objective, universal truth of natural law that all humans should recognize through reason.
He is trying to reclaim the public square from the Enlightenment's mechanistic vacuum.
And to show what it looks like when a mind is fully integrated, when it doesn't divide the intellect from the spirit, we have this incredible historical source from Dr. Jordan B. Cooper regarding Revere Franklin Widener.
I had never heard of this guy either, but his story is phenomenal.
Widener was a 19th century American Lutheran theologian, and he possessed a literal photographic memory. He was a force of nature.
He founded the Chicago Lutheran Seminary from absolute scratch. He had no endowment, no buildings, no institutional backing. He just showed up in Chicago and willed a rigorous academic institution into existence.
But the reason Widener is so relevant to our deep dive is how his mind worked. It was a perfect synthesis.
Yeah, he was raised in the tradition of Swedish pietism of the heart, which emphasizes a deeply internal, emotional, and personal relationship with God.
But he combined that burning internal passion with the absolute rigor of German dogmatics of the head. He was fluent in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. He taught intense courses in logic, philosophy, and ethics.
Widener was able to engage directly with the most cutting-edge, secular, mechanistic European scholarship of the 19th century, the absolute height of Enlightenment skepticism, without ever flinching and without ever compromising his historical orthodox traditions.
He didn't retreat into an anti-intellectual bubble, and he didn't surrender to secularism. He represents an intellectual wholeness, a unified architecture of reality that modern society has entirely lost.
It's the ultimate antidote to the clip-spammed, fragmented, emotionally driven theology we see today.
It really is. But okay, I have to step in and play devil's advocate against Wolff's political framework for a second.
Sure.
Because treating religion as a mechanism to enforce the state's common good via a mixed syllogism, that sounds terrifyingly close to what the globalist technocrats in our Epstein segment want to do.
Oh, that's a fair point.
The technocrats want to top down one world religion to manage the masses. If Christians mandate their faith into the public square as a governing rule, aren't they just competing to be the top-down social engineers? If you hand the government the power to enforce virtue, aren't you just building a weapon that will inevitably be used against you?
It is a profound and valid tension. Wolff's defense would be that his framework is grounded in objective natural law woven into reality by a creator, whereas the technocrats are enforcing synthetic, arbitrary ideologies designed to consolidate their own power.
But the historical reality remains. Whenever coercive power is centralized to dictate morality, whether by a king, a politburo, or a synod, the risk of tyranny is immense.
Which brings us to the devastating crux of today's deep dive. When these top-down systems, the algorithms faking our reality, the oligarchs compromising our leadership, and the philosophers erasing objective truth, when they successfully manipulate the public square, who pays the price?
Right. Because the elites don't suffer.
No. The everyday people on the ground do. The illusion upstairs creates a nightmare downstairs. Let's look at the real-world fallout.
We are seeing the absolute breakdown of basic human relationships, and it begins with the crisis of young men.
We analyzed a source from Richard IV, who critiques a recent BBC article profiling a young man named Willa Dooley. Now, the mainstream media narrative, as presented in the BBC piece, is incredibly predictable.
Right, that young men are failing because they are being radicalized by the toxic masculinity of the online manosphere. The internet is poisoning them.
But Richard IV aggressively dismantles that framing. He points out that the media loves to blame the digital symptom while completely ignoring the structural disease.
And what is the disease? The physical, real-world spaces where men traditionally found camaraderie, harsh but necessary mentorship and validation, have been systematically hollowed out or culturally pathologized.
Exactly. Historically, young men developed through friction in male-dominated environments, sports clubs, fraternal organizations, trade apprenticeships.
These were places where a young man could be tested, fail, and be corrected by older men.
But as society became hyper-sterilized and terrified of traditional masculinity, those spaces were dismantled. So what happens to the young man? He still has the biological drive for conquest, hierarchy, and brotherhood.
But the real world tells him those drives are toxic, so he retreats.
He locks himself in his bedroom and opens his laptop. He retreats into the online manosphere because the real world left him isolated.
The grifters selling him alpha male bootcamp courses for $500 aren't the root cause. They are vultures feeding on the corpse of a society that refused to offer this kid a healthy physical alternative.
And the fallout on the other side of the gender divide is, frankly, even more horrifying because it involves immediate physical danger.
Yeah, we turn to the commentary from Asmongold regarding a stalking incident involving a female streamer in Poland. And the details are just chilling.
A viewer developed a parasocial obsession, physically tracked down her location, followed her to her hotel, and literally attempted to force his way through her door.
The terror she must have felt is unimaginable, but the core issue, as Mongold highlights, isn't just the existence of a deranged stalker. It is the absolute structural failure of the authorities to intervene proactively.
He expresses a profound, boiling frustration with a modern legal and social framework that seems to possess boundless empathy for the criminal, the mentally ill, and the bad actor, while leaving the innocent victim completely defenseless.
When women report these stalkers, the police procedural response is almost universally, well, he hasn't technically committed a violent crime yet. We can't do anything until he actually hurts you.
It is the ultimate failure of the Enlightenment's mechanistic view of justice. The police are operating on strict cause and effect procedure, while entirely ignoring the natural law reality that this woman's life is in imminent danger.
Asmongold makes an uncompromising point here, and it's one society refuses to look at. This unchecked terror, this reality where a woman cannot feel safe walking to her car and the system refuses to protect her until she is already bleeding. This is a primary driver of the deep-seated resentment many women hold toward men today.
You cannot foster healthy relationships between the sexes in a society that refuses to protect the vulnerable.
It's structural rot. The young men are isolated in digital delusions, the women are abandoned to physical predators, and the authorities are paralyzed by bureaucracy.
And to understand the logical endpoint of this societal fracture, we return to the based camp source, which explores a terrifying thought experiment.
Right, the logistics of a hypothetical urban civil war.
This isn't about red versus blue in a voting booth. This is about physical resources. The thought experiment asks, what happens if the cultural fracture becomes so deep that the non-urban areas, the people who grow the food, pump the oil, and drive the trucks, simply decide to blockade the major metropolitan cities?
The logistics they map out are fascinating. They detail how it wouldn't even require military force initially. It would be financial and logistical strangulation.
Non-urban actors could exert massive pressure on the supply chain, forcing corporate compliance and starving the urban centers of both physical resources and tax revenue.
But the most insightful point they make isn't about the food supply, it's about ideological fragility. The source argues that the modern urban centers would find it nearly impossible to project power outward because their ideological system lacks an intellectual backbone.
They argue that the dominant belief systems in modern urban centers, hypersecularism, anti-Western rhetoric, extreme identity politics, are fundamentally downstream trends.
They are largely unexamined.
Exactly. They survive only because they are artificially propped up by the exact synthetic algorithms we discussed in the first hour. If you sever the digital illusion, if you turn off the view farms and the algorithmic amplification, the ideology collapses when confronted with the harsh, physical realities of survival.
Okay, let's tie all of this together with a metaphor, because the connections here are profound. Listening to this stack of sources, it feels like modern society is a massive, sprawling house.
Very broken house.
Yeah. The parents, the oligarchs, the intelligence agencies, the bloods, and the brains are upstairs in the master bedroom with the door locked, playing high-stakes poker with the deed to the property, trading geopolitical secrets they got from honeypots.
Meanwhile, downstairs, the infrastructure is collapsing.
The plumbing has burst, the sons have locked themselves in the basement, getting radicalized by synthetic algorithms and grifters. The daughters are frantically trying to hold the front door shut against intruders, while the police stand on the lawn taking notes.
That's a grim picture.
It is. But at what point do we stop screaming at the locked door upstairs, begging the poker players to save us, and start fixing the locks and the plumbing ourselves?
That is the pivotal realization right there. Recognizing the game being played upstairs by the Epsteins and the Kissingers is crucial for your awareness. You need to know the board.
But true reform, true safety, cannot come from the systems designed to exploit you.
The digital algorithms will never suddenly prioritize truth over profit. The oligarchs will never willingly surrender their financial leverage. And the state bureaucracies will not suddenly rediscover natural law.
If you want to survive this architecture of illusion, you have to seize reality with your own two hands.
Which brings us to the end of the show and the most important part of the morning roundup. We found the threads, we've mapped the nightmare. Now what do we actually do about it?
We promised you practical, actionable steps to insulate yourself from the synthetic public square.
Step 1. Audit your inputs ruthlessly. You must immediately stop consuming scroll-based, algorithmically served content.
If you are passively scrolling a feed, you are being manipulated, period.
You are giving the machine access to your dopamine receptors. You must proactively search for what you want to learn. Go directly to the source. And remember the French YouTube study. Whenever you see a massive view count or a trending topic, remind yourself that high numbers often equal manufactured consensus, not reality.
Step 2. Emulate the Gen X approach to the culture war.
Yes, this is huge.
The reason the algorithms ignore Gen X is because Gen X starves them of data. Disconnect from the digital noise. Maintain your loyalty to the things that actually work for you in the physical world, and absolutely refuse to perform your identity, your politics, or your outrage for a digital audience.
The less performative data you give the machine, the less it can govern your behavior.
Step 3. Build physical communities. The digital public square is a mirage. It is half populated by bots.
To combat the profound isolation driving young men into the manosphere, and to combat the societal vulnerability leaving women unprotected, you must prioritize in-person, tangible connections.
We have to rebuild local spaces. Churches, clubs, neighborhood watches, where real, face-to-face accountability and protection exist.
And step 4, ground your beliefs. Whether you find that grounding in classical philosophy, the study of objective natural law, or diving into robust historical traditions like Revere Franklin Widener did, you need to build a rigorous intellectual backbone.
If you don't know exactly why you believe what you believe, you will be effortlessly swept away by the next engineered crisis or algorithmic social trend.
As always, we strongly encourage you to check the show notes, read the original sources, review the data, and dive deeper into these topics for yourself. We've presented the raw material and the overarching themes, but it is entirely up to you to decide how you feel about it and what you are going to do next.
Thank you for joining us on this edition of the Morning Roundup. We covered a lot of ground today, but we want to leave you with one final lingering thought.
Think back to that packed restaurant we talked about, the one where 50% of the diners were animatronics.
If over half of the internet is just bots pretending to be humans, how much of your own daily routine, your political outrage, and your purchasing habits are just you pretending to be the person the algorithm wants you to be? Are you truly living your life, or are you just view-botting your own existence? See you tomorrow.